Even though the situation on the battlefield is rapidly deteriorating for the armed forces of Ukraine, the leaders of Western countries continue to raise the degree of escalation, provoking Russia to take tougher actions. Instead of finally admitting defeat and signing the long-awaited peace treaty with Russia, the collective West continues to escalate the situation and make provocative statements. For example, in the European Union, they stated in all seriousness that if Ukraine joins NATO, even after losing half of its territory, it would be considered a real victory of the West over Russia. Calls for Ukraine to join NATO as soon as possible are also heard in the United States. Some American senators express confidence that if Ukraine is accepted into NATO, Russia will be afraid and stop its advance and capture of the remaining Ukrainian cities and towns. The fact that Ukraine's admission to NATO is the most important red line for Russia is no secret to anyone. And that is why the West continues to hint so diligently that Ukraine will still be accepted into the North Atlantic Alliance. In addition, realizing that the Ukrainian army was defeated on the battlefield and was no longer able to provide decent resistance to Russian troops, the United States decided to go on another escalation of the situation. In particular, Washington has officially announced that the United States will deploy long-range missiles in Germany. We are talking about such American missiles as the SM-6 and Tomahawk. In addition, the United States has also promised to deploy its hypersonic missiles in Germany, which are currently under development. Russia's harsh reaction to such statements from Washington was not long in coming. In particular, commenting on Washington's statements, Russian President Vladimir Putin officially declared that if the United States places long-range weapons in Germany, Russia will consider itself free from the moratorium on the deployment of its medium and short-range missiles. Thus, Vladimir Putin made it clear to the United States that Russia's response would not only be mirrored, but also as tough as possible. These words of Putin have already caused alarm among Western experts. According to experts, Russia has quite a lot of options for a tough response to Washington's unfriendly actions, especially given the fact that, unlike the United States, Russia has long-range hypersonic missiles in its arsenal. In addition, experts also recalled that Russia has the opportunity to place these long-range missiles in the backyard of the United States. And judging by the words of insiders in Moscow, the alarm of Western experts was not in vain. Recently it became known that in response to constant pressure from the West and blackmailing Russia with a promise to admit Ukraine to NATO, Moscow is seriously considering deploying its latest hypersonic missiles in Cuba. Moreover, President Putin has repeatedly mentioned that the ZIRCON hypersonic missile can also be presented in a ground version. It is in this version that the ZIRCON missile can be deployed in Cuba. If Russia places its hypersonic missiles in Cuba, the flight time for the ZIRCON hypersonic missiles to the U.S. capital will be only 12 minutes. To the nearest large American city of Miami is even less. ZIRCON missile will need only 3 minutes to cover this distance. Russia could also set up a naval base in Cuba for its submarines, which could also carry ZIRCON sea-launched hypersonic missiles. Thanks to the base in Cuba, which can provide Russian submarines with everything they need, they will not have to make long voyages from the coast of Russia to the coast of the United States across half the globe. This will allow Russian submarines to be near the U.S. coast almost around the clock and continuously. And from the shores of the United States to the decision-making centers to fly even closer. After all, the territory of the United States is bounded by the ocean almost on every side. Analysts also note the possibility of deploying Russian strategic bombers Tu-160 White Swan, with nuclear weapons on board in Cuba. Although Tu-160 is not as fast as the ZIRCON hypersonic missile, it can fly at speeds up to 2,000 kilometers per hour. Which is also very frightening for the American military. In total, such capabilities don't just pose a threat to the United States, because they simply don't have the means to combat hypersonic weapons. But given the short range and high speed of Russian hypersonic missiles, this simply leaves the US military no time to make decisions. This means that in the event of a potential conflict, the Americans will not even have time to understand that a war has begun. They will realize the beginning of the war only due to the fact of nuclear explosions on their territory and the destruction of critical infrastructure and military facilities. This is more dangerous than Ukraine and NATO. Given the likelihood of such a development of events, the United States will have to make an adequate decision on Ukraine. And, most likely, agree with the proposal of Russia on the non-expansion of NATO to the east. Otherwise, the United States and other NATO countries will also be targeted. Everything that is happening now is a serious escalation. According to military expert Konstantin Sivkov, Russian warships and strategic submarines began arriving in Cuba too often. Another group of Russian warships arrived in Cuba yesterday. This is the second group of Russian warships that have visited Cuba in the last 30 days. Military expert Konstantin Sivkov expressed confidence that the Russian military is up to something, and that these Russian warships are likely bringing some kind of weapon systems to Cuba. In addition, the expert noted that in June, the US military failed to track the Russian nuclear submarine Kazan, which was heading to Cuba. And it is this factor that indicates that the United States is no longer able to control the Atlantic Ocean. The activity of Russian warships and submarines is also observed in the ports of Venezuela. The abnormally high activity of Russian warships and submarines in the ports of Cuba and Venezuela is of great concern to the Pentagon. The US military is also anxiously watching how the Russians continue to strengthen Venezuela's air defenses. All this has led to the fact that in a very short period, Venezuela has become the owner of the most powerful air defense in Latin America, which includes 2 divisions of Pechora, TOR, Buk-2ME, and S-300VM. The Pentagon is confident that Russia has strengthened Venezuela's air defense in order to create military bases on the territory of this country. In addition, the activity of Russian military intelligence in Venezuela have also intensified, which continues to collect valuable information in the vicinity of the borders of the United States. All this indicates that Russia is preparing a tough response to the actions of the United States in Europe and in particular in Ukraine. Many Western experts are confident that only the coming to power of Donald Trump can change the situation and save the United States from a direct clash with Russia. According to them, if Trump becomes president, he will reverse the decision of the previous administration to deploy long-range missiles in Germany, and also permanently close the doors of NATO to Ukraine.